Welcome to the Ground to Grow podcast. My name is Aparna Majmudar, and in this bonus episode, I'm sharing and retelling the folktale of Bluebeard in support of the conversation on the Maiden archetype. And so it goes. There's a hank of beard hanging on the outside of the convent of the old white nuns in the faraway mountains. No one really remembers how this beard got there. However, some say that the nuns were the only ones able and willing to touch the remains. The beard was blue, indigo blue, blue like ice on a lake, blue like the shadow of a hole at night. A friend of my friend has seen this beard, and so it must be true. The beard belonged to a giant of a man, a failed magician, a man who had a penchant for women, and his name was Bluebeard. Bluebeard courted 3 sisters at the same time. Aware that they were put off by the blueness of his beard, he endeavored to create a magical experience in which they'd see the softer side of him. He took them out to a day in the forest where they cantered on horses with their dogs running ahead and to the sides of them. And they also picnicked a beautiful feast with delightful finger foods and crystal glasses full of champagne. When they got home, the sisters shared their highlights of the day, but eventually the older 2 sisters came to their senses. But the younger sister, she thought to herself, Bluebeard must not be so bad. I mean, how could a man who indulged them and created such a beautiful experience be that bad? And maybe, just maybe, his beard wasn't so blue. And so when Bluebeard asked for the youngest sister's hand in marriage, after some consideration, she said yes. And soon she was living in his giant castle. And one day he was called off on a trip, but before his departure, he sat down his young wife and said to her, Darling, I must go for a period of time, but I want you to enjoy yourself. I want you to invite your family over and charge the cooks with making you all a feast. I want you to enjoy my storerooms. And here's a ring of keys to all the doors in our castle. However, there's one key, the one with the scroll work at top. You may not use that key. And so after Bluebeard left for his trip, his wife invited her 2 sisters over and shared with them this opportunity to explore the castle. And they said collectively, let's make a game of it. Let's figure out what keys belong to what doors, and let's open them all, and let's find the door that belongs to the smallest key. There were 100 rooms on each wing of the house, and so one by one, the sisters opened up the rooms. Behind one door, there was a massive storeroom of hunting gear. Behind another, the stores of canned tomatoes, jarred tomatoes, and pickled onions and summer berries were kept. Door by door, they found delightful things. They found Bluebeard's money stores full of gold and other treasures. And they went through the house pretty diligently, opening each door, up one wing, down the other, until at the very end they were staring at a blank wall in the basement, in the cellar. They hadn't found the door that belonged to the smallest key until they heard behind them a sound, a creaking sound. Eek! And they turned their heads around and they could see a tiny door shut. And they quickly got the smallest key and put it into the keyhole, turned the door, and entered a room. The room was dark, and there was a gust of wind, of cold wind that suddenly surrounded the three sisters. They called out for light. One of the sisters went and got some candles, and then they lit the candles. And once the room was illuminated, all the sisters screamed simultaneously. The horror, the horror. And they could see bones strewn across this room, blackened with time. There was blood seeping through the walls, and there were stacks, pyramids of skulls, stacked as if they were apples. Quickly, the girls left that room and closed the door. But the youngest sister held the key, and it was bleeding. And she took her white skirts and tried to rub the blood off, and the blood kept flowing from this tiny little key. And then she went to the room of the cooks and asked for horsehair. And then she scrubbed the key, and the keys continued to bleed. She went outside and got ash and rubbed that in to soak up the blood, and the blood still poured. And then she wrapped cobwebs around the key, and the blood continued to flow. She thought this must all be a really bad dream. And then she took the key and she put it at the top of her wardrobe in her chamber and wished away what she wished she hadn't seen. The next day, Bluebeard came home and he asked his wife, "How was your time?" And she answered, "Lovely." He asked, "Did you get to see my money stores? How were they?" "Lovely." "Did you see my food stores?" "Yes, they were lovely." "So all must be well." "All is well." "Well then," Bluebeard said, "you must hand over the ring of keys." And so his wife hands over the ring of keys, and immediately he notices that the ring of keys is missing the smallest key. And he asks where it is. And his wife said, "Oh, I I'm I was writing the other day and it must have fallen out of my skirt pockets. And I don't know where it is." Bluebeard asks again, "Where is the key?" And his wife responds, "I don't know." And then Bluebeard reaches out to caress her face, And as he's doing so, he then seizes her hair and he says, "You infidel, where is the key?" And while he's holding his wife by her hair, he charges into her room, goes to her wardrobe, and collects the key. He then takes her down to the cellar and says, "You must suffer the fate of all my other brides. You're going inside that room. The door to the room of the corpses opens without Bluebeard even needing to use the key." And as Bluebeard's trying to propel his wife into this room, launch her in, throw her in, she grabs a hold of the door frame and says, "Wait. Let me make my peace with God before I die. Let me make my peace. I just need a quarter of an hour." A quarter of an hour. He allows his wife to have a quarter of an hour to make her peace with God. And so she runs up to her room and installs her two sisters on the castle ramparts while she kneels down to pray. And then she cries out to them, "Do you see our brothers coming, sisters, sisters?" And the sisters say, "We don't see anything on the horizon." A few minutes go by, and the youngest sister cries out again, "Do you see anything? Do you see our brothers coming?" And the two older sisters say, "Yes, we think there's a possibility. There is a dust devil in the distance, and that might be them." Meanwhile, Bluebeard's yelling out to his wife, "Where are you? It's time. It's time. You belong to me." And he charges up to her room, and the rocks in the wall loosen, the mortar comes undone. He's a force of a man. And at the same time, as he opens the door to his wife's chambers, her two older brothers charge into the castle, still on their horses, and climb up to her chamber at the same time. They push Bluebeard out onto her parapet, and they whip him, and they cut him, and they pierce him, and eventually they bring him to his death. They kill him. So all that remains of him is his beard and gristle left for the buzzards. I love this story. I love it for a number of reasons. I mostly love it because I can relate and see certain themes of the story in my own life. So there are a few elements that I want to speak to unpack a little bit. The first being the blueness of the beard, and how this is an anomaly among the people, and yet it's very much in plain sight that there's something off with this person. His beard is blue. And the older sisters, even though they enjoyed their day out with Bluebeard, they get a sense that something's too off for them to continue to entertain him fundamentally. The youngest sister, however, she tells herself, maybe his beard is not so blue. And what I'm picking up in that is that she's overriding her own intuition because of her ego, because she was seduced by their time in the woods, and she's interested in more. And there's also this naivete of, you know, what I've seen so far of this man, it's not problematic. Like, it's actually super charming, even though the beard is blue. So the next thing that I want to touch upon is that there's one room that Bluebeard's wife may not enter. And it seems pretty arbitrary of like, what is this room? And yet her curiosity and that of her two older sisters, and the older sisters represent a more wizened woman, someone who has more access, or two people who have more access to their intuition. They naturally say, let's make a game of this. Let's figure out what room belongs to which key, and or which key belongs to which room, and where is this off limits room? What's behind that door? They don't take no for an answer. And these questions of what belongs to what, what's behind the doors, those are keys in life. Of also, what do I need to know that's hiding or that's a secret? Then there's the blood that's coming out of the key. And what's interesting about the blood is that it doesn't necessarily represent menstrual blood, but it represents arterial blood of, unless there's action taken to protect oneself, for the wife to protect herself, then she's going to continue losing her life force energy. Something's amiss. It's not set right. And so no amount of wishing the blood away, no amount of wishing that she had never entered that room changes the fact that she did. And that now there's a real risk of losing herself. She still stays in the castle waiting for Bluebeard to return, which is interesting that the information wasn't enough for her to take action. Her life needs to be at risk in some sense before she can access other parts of herself. And that includes her older brothers. And these brothers represent the stronger, clearer, directional part of her that she does access and eventually relies on to save her own life. So I hope you found this retelling interesting and food for thought. One part of the folktale that I continue to return to is, what am I unwilling to accept is something I know. Where are there places in my life that I'm not reacting to information that's being given to me? And these questions are the key. The questions are the key. And also, how do I access those stronger parts of myself? How do I call on my inner brothers who take swift action?